your thumbnail and your title is doing the heavy lifting before anyone ever sees your content.
With new media, YouTube, you can just like jump into being like a director essentially.
Study your audience behavior. Give what your audience wants.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Creators Uncut. Super excited again for another episode. We've got a great guest for you. Her name is Bruna Vilela, and she's a creative producer in the YouTube industry and podcast space. She's been doing it for a little bit, but Bruna, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Like we were chatting before the recording started, it's very surreal to be in this position because I'm very used to being in your position, working on recordings and being the producer on it and not the guest. So I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, definitely. I'm especially excited to talk with you because you're actually the first creative producer we've had on the show. And we can kind of dive into that in a little bit. But first, why don't you go ahead and tell our audience a little bit about yourself, kind of what you do for work, and yeah, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a creative producer and a showrunner. I've been working in the YouTube and podcasting space going on 4 years full time now. Um,
Mm.
I I come from a traditional media background. I grew up actually being a performer. I studied acting. I lived in New York, and
Mm.
I thought that was going to be my trajectory. And then sort of life happened, and I got really curious on how to run things behind the camera. So I actually went back to school and studied production, film and television production in college. So I got kind of a rundown on how that works, but again, all from a very traditional standpoint, traditional filmmaking, broadcast television, that sort of thing. And then life took another turn with the pandemic happening and kind of,
Mhm.
all my plans went out the window. And so actually my very first job out of college during the pandemic was working. I became an electrician for a theater.
Oh.
Like I learned how to program lights and I worked with a lighting designer, and eventually I even moved up to becoming what's called a master electrician,
Mhm.
and I had other people that worked under me, and I learned how to do and program lighting for performances and live events. And um, so a very weird trajectory on like making ends meet during a time where the world was just kind of going through this crazy phase. And
Mhm.
my official trajectory to producing was through my last year of during my last year of college before the shutdown happened. I got an internship at a company where I am based, a production company.
Mhm.
And ironically, I was only with them for about 3 months because because COVID shut down my internship.
Oh.
And so not that long, didn't get to make much of any impression, but lo and behold, 2 years later, kind of post pandemic starting, world starting to get back to normal, they actually reached back out to me and they're like, hey, you interned for us. And, what are
Mm.
you up to? Are you still in the area? And at that point, I was working as an electrician. And it was one of those things that they reached out, and I was very surprised they even remembered me. And they kind of let me know that they were expanding because they were like an agency,
Mhm.
a production company, but also picture like a boutique agency, working with brands, making commercial work. Um, and so they were starting a different branch that was going to lean into original content
Mhm.
that would be published on YouTube and podcast platforms. And they reached out to me like, hey, we got this, we need a producer, and are you interested, sort of thing. And so how I got to where I am is a little bit falling into my lap, but also kind of really just trying to maintain my contacts and my connections. I didn't think a 3-month internship my senior year of college would years later produce a position for me to kind of get started in this new venture that they were taking on in the YouTube and production and podcast production space. So I was hired with absolutely zero experience on how to navigate either of those platforms. And the rest is history. I learned everything on the job.
Wow. Wow, that, like you said, is a very interesting trajectory. So you kinda got into the YouTube industry from this. It was originally traditional media, and then they decided, "You know what? Let's try YouTube." Do you know why they, like, decided to go into YouTube?
Yeah, so the CEO of the company, the CEO wanted to start producing original content, like original IP that the company owns.
Oh,
They're not working for a client, it's not a brand. It is completely 100% owned by I mean, essentially the CEO being the founder of the company. He wanted to have his own content that his company owned. And so that started with podcasts, and eventually that grew into developing other shows and series and formats that then would get distributed out on YouTube. So, I mean, that's essentially why the goal of the YouTube channel and the podcasts, it wasn't even necessarily to, well, yes, it was to grow, but it was to use those platforms almost as vehicles for proofs of concepts for bigger shows and series that
mm,
then could be shopped around by streamers or bigger production companies or even other creators. Like the goal was never to just stay within YouTube, but it was to use it very strategically as a platform to create an audience, show what this concept could be, and just as a way to prove it, and from that point shop it around to streamers and other companies, which is very unique. I like to say that is almost like the perfect blend between new and traditional media, because I was working for a production company, so very much like traditionally structured in a way.
mhm,
And but we were doing new media things. We were learning distribution on YouTube, distribution on podcast platforms. But at the same time, our channel wasn't, it's not like a Mr. Beast channel. It's not like
right.
many of the big creators. It was a very it's a channel that's used very strategically, and it's not necessarily about just the view counts, not even about the subscriber count at all. It's more of a allow us to show you this proof of concept that we can then shop around, and make it into a bigger project, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. It kinda reminds me, like, it's basically like a lead generation machine, although, like, on a much bigger scale. Like, a lot of YouTubers, they become business people. They, like, create merchandise and stuff like that to sell to their subscribers. So, like, their YouTube videos are like the funnel to sell those
Yeah.
products. But it kinda seems like with your channel or the channel you helped build, like, you create concepts and sell those shows as traditional media. So in a way, it's similar, but like it's on a much bigger scale. If is that right?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, because we were at the same time that we were doing the daily tasks, of uploading the podcasts, uploading the YouTube videos, and doing all new media things
Mhm,
behind the scenes. The rest of the team would be making like very traditional, like streaming television treatments. Like they
mhm.
would take the show and build an entire treatment for then that to be shopped by streaming networks. So it
Yeah,
was very
yeah.
much a combination of both kinds of media working together, because while the YouTube channel is growing, that's awesome, because that's showing that there's audience, there's interest, um, there's like actual promise in this concept and this idea.
Mhm.
So leaning into YouTube strategy, into podcast strategy, that was always a win. We weren't losing anything by investing into these new media tactics.
Yeah.
But at the same time, my director, he would be taking meetings on a weekly basis and showcasing these very traditional treatments of like, here's the show, you can check it out, we've got the concept of it on YouTube, but here's our deck and here's what, and then it would be more of a more traditional media conversation happening behind the scenes, while my role in particular, kind of as the day-to-day showrunner of all these things, I was way more involved in growing everything using new media, while my bosses and those my superiors above me, they were working in a more traditional sense, trying to get these IPs sold.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I definitely wanna dive into, the differences between new media and traditional media. But before we get to that, your title is a creative producer, and I kinda wanna talk about that a little bit because a lot of the YouTubers I've interviewed on the show, actually probably like most YouTubers in general, are like one-man bands where they kinda do everything themselves. Eventually, YouTubers kinda grow their channel, and a lot of them hire team members, have their own crew. So this might be for bigger YouTube channels, but what does a creative producer do? Like, what would be the benefit of a YouTuber hiring a creative producer?
Yeah, I love this question. So I think most creators don't know what they're missing until they actually get a creative producer sometimes
Mm,
in what they're doing. Um, I'm just trying to think of like a really simple way to describe this. So the way I think of the creator as the artist.
okay.
They're the talent, they're the artist, they're the ones bringing the vision. Now, and again, maybe going a little bit more towards a bigger channel.
Mhm,
If a creator is the artist, the strategist, the one, that's analyzing the platform, they're the analyst.
mhm,
Creator's artist, strategist is the analyst. The creative producer is the person that connects those two and makes sure the work actually gets done, and it
mm,
gets done well, and that it gets seen by the audience.
mm,
So, a lot of YouTubers, I mean, if not most of them, they do start off as one man bands, and they have to wear every single hat. They're the talent, the writer, the editor, their own producer, their own strategist, which is, it constantly amazes me, the creators that do all of this work by themselves, because
mhm.
it is so much work, trying to sustain a YouTube channel. And so the creative producer kind of takes the operational and strategic load off of the creator, so that the creator can stay a creator, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah,
we allow the creator to keep doing what they do best. Now, producer also, I think, is a big umbrella term. So depending on who you're talking to or who you're working with, different kinds of producers have different kinds of responsibilities. And so I'm just speaking based on the creative producing that I've done, but you might speak to another creative producer where their responsibilities were a little bit different.
mhm,
But at least in my case, creative producing involved like running development on new shows and developing new formats, managing the team, managing the editors, managing post production, owning the production calendar, doing creative reviews, working with the YouTube strategist on the best packaging for thumbnails and titling, and often also being the bridge between editorial and sponsors or brand partners of the channel. So, as a producer, you're making a lot of day to day decisions, a lot of operational decisions, and you might be managing people, but you're also studying audience behavior. I used to do that a lot when I was with my company full time,
mhm.
and you're working with the creator to greenlight ideas or to kill some ideas, depending on resources available. And so, really creative producing is like knowing when we can expand on the creative, or when we need to, flex on it a little bit, if that makes sense.
Mm, yeah.
Um, and I would say something that's a little bit underrated, something that I had to do a lot of too, was protecting the brand of the channel or protecting the image of the creator. Sometimes I think when creators start to get that burnout, that they've been putting in so much work and wearing so many hats, you know having a producer that's alongside of you, that can be in the room to remind you, like, hey, remember why your audience comes to you. Okay, don't stray away from the promise that you made with the kinds of videos that you produce. And so a producer will fight for you, they'll fight for you, they'll fight for your content. They're your right hand person and your partner that wants to see you succeed. And when you're burnt out, we're here to remind you of why your audience is here for you. And so I think for creators that are looking for producers, I would say if you can find a really good one that you trust and let them take ownership of that part of your work, you're going to be you're going to be so set, and I think your content is going to grow exponentially. So
Yeah.
I think it is, I understand saying only maybe bigger channels have producers, but when you get to that point, I would say highly invest in one, because it's not, I don't consider it a luxury position. Like, it's the position that's going to allow you as the creator to stay being the creator and do what you do best. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, yeah, I really like that explanation. Hopefully that helps, some of our creators listening to this. And I only said like bigger channels mainly because like bigger channels have more revenue in order to invest in their channel.
Of course. Yeah.
Like the smaller brand new channels like that are just starting out. That's why they are one man bands most of the time, is because they just don't have any I guess
It's so
money to
impressive.
invest.
It's so
Yeah.
impressive. The creators that can get to that subscriber count that's very significant before they even hire a producer, it's it's phenomenal. A producer or an
Yeah.
editor, I would say, because those are two bottlenecks that I think creators go through when they're the one man band still trying to do it all. So
Yeah.
I have much respect for them, but at the same time, it's like, hey, let us help you. Let us be your partner, and
Yeah.
help you maintain work life balance as well, and have a life outside of content, and hopefully create a healthy atmosphere for your content creation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like kind of like coaching in a way, it sounds like. But I really like what you said kind of at the beginning of your explanation, where you connect the analyst with the artist or the creator. I think that that really sums it up pretty well. So um, yeah, I think I want to move on and kind of dive into the differences between new and traditional media. So, Bruna, in your eyes, what are the biggest differences between new and traditional media? And maybe explain what they are first for people who aren't familiar with traditional media.
Yeah, I would say there's definitely a lot of differences, but I think I want to start off by saying I don't think traditional and new media are in opposition of each other. I think they need each other.
That's a good clarification.
So I'm a fan of both, and I think both have a lot to learn from each other. And I think some of the best content is, and the best team structures for content creators, I think they live right in that gap, using both strategies from traditional and newer media. So I would say, well, I'll start off right there. I think one of the major differences, not necessarily differences, but something that new media is learning from traditional media is actually structure,
Mhm.
especially when it comes to team structure. And like we just talked about, a lot of creators start off as one man bands, and now we're really seeing this push, especially for the huge channels. They're becoming their own production companies and their own enterprises. And
Yeah.
a lot of that structure, starting from the CEO to an executive producer to a director, a producer, the editing team, post production supervisor, whatever the case may be, a lot of that structure is traditional media structure. They may have different titles. In traditional media, it's usually it's the producer, executive producer, and director that are the top three people in
Mhm.
new media. You have your creator, your talent, you it might be your producer and your strategist. Those are the three top people working for your channel right now. But I think production pipeline is something that new media is very much using from traditional media. I would say, but you asked differences. I'll go for what I think is like one of the obvious ones is really about distribution. In traditional media, when I'm talking about traditional media, I'm talking. I think streaming can still fall into that, but we're talking about broadcast TV, or filmmaking, making films that still premiere in theaters that you go out and purchase a ticket for.
Mhm.
So that's what I mean by traditional media versus new media, which is, obviously YouTube and uh, Instagram, TikTok, vertical format.
Yeah, social media.
Yeah, vertical format content, and that's what we mean by new media. We didn't have this 20 years ago, 25 years ago. It was mainly all long form. So that's what I mean by those. And in terms of distribution, like in traditional media, you if I'm making a commercial and I want it to air during the Super Bowl, you're obviously paying a lot of money. You're building out the concept, you're filming it, paying astronomical prices to get that time slot during the Super Bowl. But after that's done, basically your distribution is guaranteed. You bought the slot, your commercial's going to play. And distribution in new media on YouTube is not like that. You have to earn that click from your viewer.
Mhm.
It's in traditional media, your content matters, whereas not that it doesn't matter in new media, but in YouTube, your thumbnail and your title is doing the heavy lifting before anyone ever sees your content. And that was something I really had to learn, because I would produce these pieces that I would think are absolutely incredible that wouldn't perform because my title and my thumbnail it had no strategy behind it there was no reason someone would want to click on that.
Right.
And so, in new media, you've got your title, your thumbnail, and the first 30 seconds of your content doing all of the heavy lifting. Whereas in traditional media, it's a lot different. If I'm even comparing it to a movie, I'm not too sure of a movie that completely bombed at the box office, maybe because their poster was not that great to look at. Not
Yeah.
all posters are home runs, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that your film is bombing because of that. And in at least on YouTube, if your thumbnail's not doing the heavy lifting, your content is not going to get seen. And that was like a major difference in content creation and producing that I had to learn. Distribution is entirely different from one to the other. One thing that doesn't necessarily have to do with production, but that I just love about the creator economy and new media is that there is a lower barrier to entry.
Mhm.
In traditional media, even back to when I was acting, for you to get on set, it was, do you have an agent? Do you belong to the right unions to be able to get on that set? You have to audition. You have to, the barrier to entry to kind of do any sort of content was much stricter than within new media, where you you have your phone and you can kind of film whatever you want to film and be the star of your own creation, your own content, and you have a clear direct path to upload that content wherever you want it to, and you have the potential to monetize it without um owing your agent, or
Mhm.
going through these multiple steps like you'd kind of have to do that in traditional media. And that's even just from a performing aspect. If you wanted to work in traditional media, um you know you have to network the old fashioned way, to try to get your foot in the door of a production studio or a major company, or I think it was something that used to take a lot longer, in my opinion. And
Mhm.
now new media has just allowed millennials, Gen Z, and Gen Alphas to start these incredible careers in media almost right away. And at least when I was in school and growing up, that was just unheard of. So I love that the barrier to entry is a lot lower than in traditional media.
Yeah, I just wanna interject something here, so I went to college for filmmaking, it was called digital cinema at my university, but Um, one of the things that I didn't love about filmmaking is, like you said, it's networking the old-fashioned way. You had to start at the bottom,
Yeah,
as like a PA, and then you had to slowly work your way up. Um, Whereas, like with new media, YouTube, you can just like jump into being like a director essentially.
yeah.
There's pros and cons to both. You know, uh, but I just that's one of the reasons why I went to new media and YouTube is, it was just easier to begin with, and I felt like I didn't have to jump through so many hoops, invest that much money to get started in this industry, so
A 100%. I went through the same thing. I One of my first gigs, while still in college, I was a PA. Working 14 to 16-hour days on a set. For $150. That was the flat rate for a PA, and you would go to set and just hope to network with. Maybe you get to talk to a producer, maybe you get to talk to even if it's like a key grip or someone,
Mhm.
someone from the lighting team, the gaffer, whoever it may be, that you can kind of express your interest in filmmaking. It was very different. And yeah, it's just incredible. Like I'm very partial to YouTube. I love YouTube. So it's just incredible the kinds of opportunities and how it's shaped media today, and it's allowing
Yeah,
all these new careers to kind of pop up where we didn't have those even just a few years ago.
yeah, and I think nowadays, the line between traditional and new media is kinda getting more and more blurred. Like both sides are kind of learning from each other.
Yeah.
um, so, Bruna, this might be a hard question to answer, but if you had advice for YouTubers, like what would be one skill or thing from traditional media that YouTubers could could take and help their careers?
Ooh.
Um, if you could narrow it down to one thing, that might be hard.
Oh yeah, that's really hard. But I love the question though.
Or vice
Well,
versa.
I'll say this. The most important thing to me is story. I am a storyteller at heart. Um, it's what I care about the most as a producer is the
Mhm,
story. And so I realize not every YouTube video is necessarily a story, a tutorial, a reacts video, it's not as I realize not everything is a story, but I do think that with traditional media, they story structure and just storytelling in general, I think that is still the best skill you could ever invest in on your team. Even if that's not your strong suit, then get someone on your team who just is a good storyteller. I mean, marketing is good storytelling.
mhm.
Anything that invokes an emotion or a feeling from your viewer that makes them want to keep clicking on your content. So I still think that would be my advice. Like, still study storytelling, different story structures, formats, beats. Your editor is a storyteller. Like, my goodness, editors don't nearly get enough credit for being amazing storytellers. It could be a video of a creator just doing commentary, but a solid editor knows when to interject, the memes, the sound effects, everything to make that piece flow and keep the viewer engaged. So to me, it all comes down to storytelling and story structure. No matter what your channel is, you're gonna learn something from that that's gonna be beneficial to you.
I really like that. I completely agree. Maybe I'm biased because I am an editor, but, you know, story like, I think, that's one of the reasons why traditional media is so good is because they focus on the story the most, um, and so I feel like their content is just always so good, so polished, and, because the barrier to entry is lower on the YouTube side, people aren't as experienced with creating stories, and so I completely agree. Learning to create good stories is an essential skill.
Yeah, it's something, a lot of people think, "Oh, I wanna evolve my channel and my content," and they go immediately to production value, which is fine. If you wanna increase your production value and put more money, that's great. I fully support that, but this is more of an intangible, like, unseen thing, like, a way that you can evolve often without having to spend a lot more money is, like, invest in learning storytelling. And I've told that to a few people, and it has resonated and helped them a little bit, because it, whether you are trying to sell something or review something, there is something that storytelling can teach everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Um, so Bruna, I kind of want to move on a little bit. This year on our show, we're trying to, maybe share more experiences or stories from our interviews. I know you worked with the YouTube channel Ironclad, and I was just wondering, has there been any really memorable moments working with Ironclad? Like anything that stood out to you, whether that's, comments or specific video projects or podcasts. Was there like one moment that was really memorable while helping Ironclad?
Yeah, oh gosh, there are many moments. I think I can talk about a video project, but I think, well, I'll say this, that really did mean a lot, and it was a comment. Um, and it was someone that just commented on one of the episodes that we did for one of the podcasts.
Mhm,
And essentially it was a comment about trust, and they were like, "I feel like I can trust you guys. You
mhm,
guys are, you're you're showing us what other news outlets or other media, because it was about, this particular show was very like current events, not necessarily newsy, but very much commentary on current events.
mhm.
And so, and this person was like, "Thank you for bringing this to light."
Yeah, that's awesome. I love hearing those stories, especially when it's like a commenter or a subscriber that really makes an impactful comment. It must be really validating, getting comments like that. It's really motivating to produce more content like that to help your viewers. So thanks for sharing that, Bruno.
Yeah, for sure.
So I've got one more question for you. And by the way, this has been a great episode. I love the conversation we've had, the differences between traditional and new media, that experience you just shared. But like I said, this is a question we kind of ask all of our guests. And, when you're just starting a YouTube channel, sometimes you just don't know stuff exists. And so we like to share mistakes that people have made so our new YouTubers can kind of learn. So I kind of mentioned it, but has there been a mistake you've made throughout your career or throughout the YouTube industry that you've learned from that you think might be beneficial for someone who is just starting out?
Oh my gosh, only hundreds, if not thousands of mistakes.
Yeah, yeah. You can
Only,
share a couple if you want.
I think, going back to what we were just talking about, and I mentioned something about improving base in wanting to evolve your content by improving production value.
Mhm,
I made that mistake of, green lighting an episode for one of the shows, that the topic was a little bit more, it was different. We were branching out a little bit from what the viewers normally expected from this show and this particular host.
mhm,
And we poured a lot of money into this other idea for this episode. It involved traveling our host and our camera guy, um, to literally a war zone of a war that's still currently happening, for, if anybody wants to try to guess where we sent them to, so like extremely high stakes. having to work with a fixer overseas. It was a whole new process I wasn't used to. Um, and like we learned a lot from it, and it was, the production value was incredible and the story was incredible, and it just like the stakes were extremely high for this particular episode that we decided to
Mhm.
invest in for this particular story. And it did not perform well at all when we posted it.
Oh.
Like it was, it looked great, the production value was awesome, it was a great story, but again, in new media fashion, you know, just because it's a great story, it does not mean people are going to click on it. And, unfortunately, I think we stranded too far from the original intent of the show and that host, what they were
Mhm.
known for. And it was one of those that was like, okay, this was a learning, definitely a lesson. Um, because maybe if it was a traditional media show on Netflix or any other kind of streaming service or whatever, it might have done really, really well. But with our YouTube
Mhm.
subscribers who didn't really ask for information on what was happening in that country in that particular war, they wanted to know the things we were addressing more locally. It wasn't what they wanted.
Mhm.
It wasn't what the audience was coming back for. It wasn't what they were clicking on our particular show for. And so, that was a bitter pill to swallow. And, it was a huge, huge lesson. Like, study your audience behavior, give what your audience wants. And I'm all for evolving the content, but at the same time, I think if you want to branch out and do something completely left field, just know you're taking a huge gamble when it comes to YouTube. Your subscribers, I don't know. Each case is unique. They may love it, or it'll most likely flop. And in my case, it definitely flopped. And that was something which is ironic because another one of the episodes that I pitched the story for, it was local, it was way lower stakes. It was more of an emotional story to report on,
Mhm.
much less like current events and, worldwide high stakes idea. That episode that was way easier to produce, a lot cheaper and less exciting in some ways. That one
Mhm.
got six-figure views, and same show, same host, same, but when the host went overseas to report on this incredible conflict that's absolutely huge and so much work went into it, that one, it didn't even hit our floor.
Yeah, yeah,
So that's a tough lesson, but if you go through it, I think you only learn it once, and you kind of get the point.
yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think that is really solid advice, and I hope any creators listening to this episode, you pay attention to that. I think YouTube has evolved over the years where you could kinda post whatever, but nowadays you have to really, like, niche down, have a very specific, I guess, route for your videos, but yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that is really good advice, so
Yeah, it was a tough lesson, but I think you only have to go through that once
Mhm.
to really learn that. YouTube is an algorithm. You need to learn how to make it work on your behalf in your favor. Don't work against it. And I think sometimes we do work against it in ways that it's like, oh man, we should have thought better before wanting to try this.
Yeah, definitely. Bruna, thanks so much for being on this show. Really appreciate it. I think you've shared a lot of great insights, a lot of good advice. If our viewers and listeners want to reach out to you, what would be the best way to do that?
Absolutely. It's really easy to get a hold of me on LinkedIn. For Bruna Vilela is my name. I I am now independent. So, you can reach me through my company, West of June Media. So my email's just Bruna at westofjunemedia.com. And I'm happy to answer any questions or collaborate or work together in any capacity. I am all for it.
Awesome. Thank you again for being on the show. And thanks to our viewers and watchers for checking out this episode. Make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this, where we talk to real creators behind the scenes. If you need help making your videos, whether that's post-production, feel free to reach out to us at creatorlux.com, and we will see you in the next one.